things that we might want to see in the future. So with that as a background, let me proudly introduce our first speaker. He's a veteran. He continues to serve our nation through his work and leadership at Syracuse University. Dr. Mike Haynie is Syracuse University's Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation. He is also the Barnes Professor of Entrepreneurship, and he was named in 2018 as a university professor, and this is a very high honor. There have only been 20 people in the history of Syracuse University who've been given that honor, and Mike is one of them. As Vice Chancellor, he leads a broad range or portfolio of responsibilities. These include innovation initiatives, including a very robust portfolio of activities on entrepreneurship and innovation programs, as well as cross-campus efforts to develop and enhance our academic offerings. And these include things that are very much focused on the veterans community, and he obviously has a deep relationship there. In fact, in 2011, he was really the founder of an organization we all know very well, IVMF, Institute for Veterans and Military Families, which has really grown into the best-in-class institute created to inform and advance policy, economic, and wellness concerns of America's veterans and their families. He's regarded as an expert in this area and of entrepreneurial decision-making and strategy, and he's here to talk to us today about how he sees some of the needs of veterans community, but not just also them, but the active duty community that we serve on a day-to-day basis. So, Mike, it is really my pleasure to have you here with us. Thanks so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Unmute. You'd think I'd get the unmute by now, given how long we've been doing this. Well, JD, thank you very much. And I'll say to the larger group what I said to JD and his team before we started. It truly is an honor for me. You know, the USO has such a proud and distinguished history and a legacy of service to the community that I'm part of, and the work you do today is just phenomenal. So I'm truly honored and honestly a little humbled for the opportunity to spend a little time with you today. You know, I think I'm a former Air Force officer, like any good Air Force officer, I come prepared with PowerPoint slides, and I have some today to share with you. And but really, what I'm going to do as I walk through them is essentially tell a story of the place I work at today, the institute that is situated within Syracuse University, and then, as JD said towards the end, give you some thoughts and ideas about at least where I see the space going, what's going to matter today and tomorrow to the community that we both serve, service members, veterans, their families. You know, so I'll begin with a very brief sort of history. As was mentioned, I am a veteran. I'm a former Air Force officer. I had the good fortune that while I was serving on active duty, the Air Force kept deciding to send me back to school. And, you know, they sent me off to the University of Oregon for an MBA. And then later I was selected to teach at the Air Force Academy. And they sent me off then again to the University of Colorado to pursue a PhD in entrepreneurship and innovation. And my time teaching at the Air Force Academy, I'm not an Air Force Academy graduate. I'm an ROTC guy. But that experience teaching was one of those moments for me that shifted my own professional and personal aspirations. I fell in love with teaching, of being around students, and it's what motivated me to get out of the Air Force in 2006 and come to Syracuse University as a professor. I'm a business school professor by faculty appointment. I teach and study entrepreneurship and innovation. And ironically, I came to the university with zero intention of having anything to do with veterans, with the military. I just wanted to be a college professor. But when I got to this institution, like many folks leaving the military, honestly, even though I had a job and a professional path, if you will, I really did feel lost. I grieved, if you will, if I can use that word, for I think what I had in the military, that sense of community, that sense of of purpose and mission. And it was really that process of trying to find something that mattered to me personally that got me started doing veterans work. I started a small program that was just going to be something for me, a social venture, if you will, of the business school here, back in 2007, to bring traumatically wounded. Here I was, a veteran and an entrepreneurship professor. Those were my two things that I could bring to the table. And I said, well, why don't we create a program to help traumatically wounded service members as they transition out of the military to become small business owners. And we created a program called the Entrepreneurship Bootcamp for Veterans with Disabilities. And this was just going to be something I did with some colleagues over the summer. And after that first program, it was much more impactful than any of us really imagined. And we had other universities come to us and say, can we be part of this? UCLA, Texas A&M, Florida State, then Purdue, then LSU, then UConn. And we realized, for me as an entrepreneurship guy, it was an opportunity recognition moment. And what I mean by that is, here I am in an environment where I have lots and lots of smart people that have lots to offer. And we can repurpose that intellectual capital, if you will, to make a difference in the lives of veterans and their families. So we launched another program for family members, and then another program for women veterans. And one of the things, and I'll jump into my slides now in a second here. When I came to Syracuse, and even when I started doing some of this veterans work, I was a little bit ignorant to the history of the institution where I landed. I didn't know anything about the history of Syracuse University. I knew they had a great entrepreneurship program, great business school. That's why I came here. But one of the things that was a surprise to me, and that I began to learn, and it really, if you go to the next slide for me, and then the next one after that, we can skip that one. What I learned shortly after I started doing veterans work here at Syracuse is that this institution has a nationally distinct story as it relates to veterans, a story that I think in contemporary times had not really been told. But it turns out that up until World War II, this was a university. Syracuse was basically a small regional liberal arts university that never had an enrollment more than about 4,000 students. And the chancellor of this university at the time, a guy named Tully, William Tully, was friends with President Roosevelt. And as World War II was winding down, President Roosevelt asked Chancellor Tully to be part of a group of other university presidents and folks from the Legion. President Roosevelt said, figure out what to do with 14.5 million returning World War II veterans. And out of that conversation came the original GI Bill. But what Chancellor Tully did, which was unique even relative to his peer presidents who were part of this group, is he came back to Syracuse and he wrote a one-page letter that I have now framed and hanging in my office. And that one-page letter was written in military format. It said, on Syracuse University letterhead, it said, from Syracuse University to returning war veterans, subject your future. And in that one-page letter, he invited admission to Syracuse University to any returning World War II veteran that wanted a college degree, even if you did not have a high school diploma. And we went from a university in 1944, 45, that had an enrollment of about 4,100 students, to within 2 years, an enrollment of just over 17,000 students. And that entire delta were returning World War II veterans. And, so it is not at all a stretch to say that Syracuse University today, as a global research university, was really created as such as a consequence of veterans. Matter of fact, if you read Chancellor Tully's memoirs, which I have, he talks very specifically and provocatively almost about the fact that he made this choice not because it was patriotic, if you will, or not because it was going to play well in the media. He made this choice because he realized intuitively that generation of veterans, those folks coming back from World War II, would go on to become leaders in industry, leaders in government, leaders in their communities, and by opening the doors of this university to those folks, it would transform Syracuse University, and it truly did. So my point is, I didn't recognize any of this history as I arrived, but as I learned this history, it set the conditions for me for what is to come. If you go on to the next slide, he's trying. I'll keep talking while he's trying. There you go. So for example, when I say set the conditions, that World War II history created these points of connection to the military and to the veteran community that have endured for, in some cases, almost 70 plus years. So for example, I learned that Syracuse University is home to the longest continuously running Army ROTC program in all of America, created in 1919 when something called the Student Army Training Corps was created. 13 universities were selected as sites for the Student Army Training Corps, Syracuse being one of them. And we're the only university in that group of 13 that at any point in our history has never shut down our ROTC program. Couple other examples: Syracuse was home to the Defense Language School throughout much of the Cold War. This was actually at the time a top secret program that was run on a remote part of our campus to train active duty service members in Russian language as well as some other security, national defense imperative languages, if you will. Our university has been home since 1952 to something called the Defense Comptroller Program. It started as the Army Comptroller Program. There might be some folks, some Army folks familiar with that program. For 65 years, almost every summer, we welcome a new class of about 50 to 60 active duty Army officers that PCS here for 14 months, all from the financial management career field. Over those 14 months, they earn 2 degrees from Syracuse University. They earn an MBA from our business school, and they earn a master's in public administration from our Maxwell School of Citizenship. Another example, our Newhouse School of Communications for more than 50 years has been home to something called the Military Photojournalism Program, also now the Military Multimedia Program. So these are all your young combat camera military photojournalist folks. It's an entirely enlisted program, the best of those career fields from each of the service branches. Usually a class of 30 come here for a year-long program. That program actually is kicking off right now for the next year. Again, 50 plus years running that program, and there's more that I will I'll skip over, if you will, but all of these points of connection historically to the military and to the veterans community, and all of this taken together for me represented an opportunity. The opportunity to leverage that history and essentially recreate that legacy in a contemporary way. This was the opportunity for me that I saw back in 2011 to make the pitch to create the Institute for Veterans and Military Families here at Syracuse University. I was very disheartened when I looked around higher education and saw how disengaged higher education as a community had been throughout much of the post 9/11 period. Here on one hand, you had, for example, employers creating these coalitions to hire veterans and support military spouses, military children. None of that was going on inside higher education. Higher education proceeded along as if the United States was not engaged in places like Iraq, Afghanistan. And for me, that was an opportunity to change that culture a little bit. So I'll come back to I'm going to talk specifically and in more detail about the IVMF, but the other condition setting, if you will, factor that really has driven a lot of the impact we've been able to have in the growth, and it speaks to the last point I made about the disengagement of higher education, is in 2014, we had a change of leadership here at Syracuse University. And you saw it on an earlier slide. Our current chancellor and president, a guy named Ken Severud, when Ken arrived, I was running these small veterans programs, had a little team of people, had proposed the creation of the IVMF, and we were just getting that off the ground. But all of that was happening while at Syracuse University. I would say separate and apart from the primary mission, if you will, and strategic focus of the university. That changed when Chancellor Severud arrived. When he was inaugurated as our 12th chancellor and president, he gave, in his inauguration speech, he set out 4 goals. And if you go to the next slide, I can talk to some of this, but he set out 4 goals for his chancellorship. 3 of those goals, and we're 150 years old this year, and he's our 12th chancellor, so you can get a sense of how long they stick around. He set out 4 goals. 3 of them were very much focused on the things that you'd expect to hear from a new university president. Elevate the research, enhance the student experience. But his 4th goal, his 4th charge to our entire university, was to position Syracuse University to be the best academic institution in the country, serving veterans, service members, and military-connected family members. And that was truly a game changer for us. I say a game changer because when it became a priority of the president, and when it became a priority of the board of trustees at the university, everything changed. And we created a standalone infrastructure that I won't go into in detail, but we set out to be the best university. At the time he arrived, we had about 200 military-connected students enrolled at Syracuse University. That's all. And that word, military-connected student, that describes our student veterans, our active duty Guard and Reserve members, as well as our ROTC kids and our military children, military dependents. Today, just basically 6 years later, a full 6% of our enrolled student population of 22,000 students are military-connected students. Our ROTC enrollment is at an all-time high. We have enrolled at Syracuse more student veterans than any other private university in America. Just about 1,400 in our total population, and we've created a culture and a climate here that I think really does support that community in ways that you don't see at other major U.S. universities. I want to get to the IVMF so I could talk about what we're doing as a university for another hour, but I do want to get to the IVMF piece. So I'll leave it by saying, if you go to the next slide, and in each of the last 3 years, I think there should be 3 of those little gold medals on here. The Military Times survey of best colleges and universities in America for service members and veterans. Syracuse University, each of the last 3 years, was ranked as the #1 private university serving that population in the country. It's something we're very proud of. It's also something that we're not satisfied with. As happens in the military, when when the new general arrives, in this case, my new chancellor, his initial charge to me was, I want you to be I want us to be the #1 ranked private university in the country serving this population. And then when we hit that goal, he said, okay, now I'm going to change the goalpost. I want us to be the #1 university, period, public or private. So, we have, we were third overall last year, and the goal is that we're going to overtake those two big publics as well. But again, I can answer any questions about this, but I do want to take the rest of my time and jump into the IVMF a little bit. So if you go to skip this one, go to the next slide. Let me tell you a little bit about what, at a high level, what the IVMF is. We created the Institute back in 2011, as I said before, because I saw an opportunity, we saw an opportunity to leverage the relationships and the intellectual capital that exists in higher education, that exists at Syracuse University, to benefit the nation's service members, veterans, and their families. Why was it that you didn't have the best policy schools in the country studying veterans issues? Why was it that you didn't have the best schools of social work, for example, looking at and acting on military family issues? Really, the community in higher education, particularly the academic community, was not engaged. So for us, this was an opportunity recognition moment. But we didn't want to create the IVMF also as simply a research entity, a policy entity. The IVMF is built at its core around, I'll describe it as thinking and then doing. We do all the things at the IVMF that you would expect of the stereotype of a research institution, if you will. We do policy work. We collect lots of data. We study lots of issues and problems impacting this community. But at the same time, like you, we also run programs, vocational programs, transition programs, business ownership programs, community-based programs for veterans and their families all over, I was going to say all over the United States, all over the globe, in all 50 states and 8 countries, in partnership with DoD. We're running programs to the tune of about, upwards of 14,000 today, 14,000 or so folks a year that graduate from the various programs that we run. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk just briefly about how we sort of bucket what it is we do. As I said, we are an academic institute from the perspective of the research, the policy analysis, the analytics work we do. We study veterans issues. We collect data on we publish on veteran and service member concerns. But then we also have these 3 programmatic buckets that really define where a lot of our impact is derived, if you will. We do work around career preparation and employment. And I'll give you some examples of those programs in a minute. But again, as I link this back to the research, one of the things that we understand well is that the extent to which we can create via employment a relatively seamless, and that word is loaded, but transition from military service to civilian life makes all the difference, not just for the transitioning individual, but for their family as well. So we focused heavily on how we work to bridge that military employment to civilian employment divide, if you will, such that we are preparing people before they leave service to be employable and in demand relative to the civilian workforce. And I'll describe in a minute how we do some of that stuff. You heard me tell the story that we got our start around entrepreneurship and small business. This is my personal passion. We still run a large portfolio of entrepreneurship business training programs for veteran service members and their families, including part of the formal DoD TAP program. So it was a team at the IVMF that designed the business ownership track of TAP, the Boots to Business program, and we still operate that program today on all OCONUS military installations. And then our community-based work. This is really our America Serves program. We realize that we can support communities with data and navigation. Navigation, what I'm talking about there is creating a system to help veterans, military families, military connected families sort of navigate the services and resources available to them in a given community. And I'll talk a little more about that program here in a second as well. If you go to the next slide, these are our buckets again, but you get a sense just as a function of logos of the various programs that represent the different lines of effort. In career preparation and employment, Onward Opportunity, which we work with the USO as a partner on, is our big program. That's our credentialing certification program. In entrepreneurship, you may recognize some of these programs as well. We talked about Boots to Business. VWise is our women veterans program. EBV is our high touch multi-university partnership program for veterans around and military family members around business ownership, and then America Serves. So go to the next slide. Just quickly, you get a sense of where we're operating programs. Everywhere you see an icon on those maps, there are IVMF people that are actually running programs. When the IVMF was created, when we cut a ribbon back in 2011, truth be told, we put on a good show, but truth be told, the IVMF team was 3 people. There were 3 of us, and we had a student employee. Today the IVMF team is upwards of 100 full-time professional staff. At any given time, we employ 30 to 40 student employees as well, but probably 30 to 35% of our workforce is not here in Syracuse, New York. They are actually on military installations around the United States running our programs in places like Seattle and Jacksonville and San Antonio and San Diego, up at Fort Drum, at Fort Carson. So we have certainly not to the scale of USO, but we have a workforce that is very similar in that regard, in that they're geographically dispersed running our programs. We've put about 130,000 folks now through the programmatic pieces of what we do, credentialing, certification, et cetera. And I failed to mention that, and I should have hit this up front, from our very founding, we made the decision that everything we would do at the IVMF would be free. So the idea of not creating financial barriers for veteran service members, family members to leverage and benefit from our programs. Our business model from the beginning was that we would go out and rely on grants, philanthropy, contracts, et cetera, to fund the work that we do, so that we don't generate revenue, if you will, from the people that we serve. As a business school professor, I will say that's a challenging business model, but it's one we signed up to, so it's one that we're committed to sticking with as well. If you go to the next slide, I'll just talk for a second about Onward Opportunity. This is one of our, I would describe, most impactful programs. For about 8 years, under the last administration, I served as and then for 4 years as the chair of the Secretary of Labor's Advisory Council on Veterans Employment. And that experience is what really birthed this program, but in a way that was frustrating. I say that because we talked on that federal advisory committee for years about the importance, the power of credentialing and certification for service members as they leave the military, and how if we were able to create pathways to credentialing and certification, the employment challenges faced by those leaving military service would be mitigated significantly. But the federal government was never really able to get there. So at some point, I had the opportunity to fly out to Seattle and meet Howard Schultz, and Howard wanted to help us do some impactful work in this space, and my pitch to him was help us create a program where we could put labor market connected, in-demand credentials and certifications from the civilian sector into the hands of transitioning service members and veterans. And that really was the origin of Onward to Opportunity. So this program today, is offered both in residence and virtually to a population that is 10,000 plus a year. Every time I brief this, I'm never quite up to date on the exact number of credentials and learning pathways, we call them, through this program, but upwards of 40 last time I checked, each one leading to a different civilian credential certifications like the PMP, the Program Management Professional, cybersecurity certifications, HR certifications, but importantly, all certifications that are in demand in the civilian workforce. Our biggest challenge with this program is meeting the demand. Every time we announce that we're enrolling a new cohort, I tell folks it's like it's like trying to get hot concert tickets. The phone would ring off the hook, and in about 10 minutes, every seat we have available is taken. We're working very hard to expand capacity here, continue to grow this program, but we're enrolling just over 1,000 folks a month in Onward to Opportunity today. The next slide. If you look at our America Serves program, really was born from some learning that came to us. Started at Stanford with some review on this idea of collective impact. The idea that if you're able to network together otherwise disparate resources in a community, that network becomes more valuable than in some of the individual parts. And what we realized that in many communities where there are populations of military families, of veterans, the resources exist in those communities often to serve the needs of veterans, the social service resources, homelessness, suicide, employment, a lot of those challenges. The problem is not that the resources aren't there, it's that veterans don't know how to access them. Service members don't know how to access them. They don't know how to essentially navigate themselves to the resources that they need when they need them. So we did a little experiment starting in New York City. We created, our theory was that if we created a technology backbone essentially a hub and spoke kind of model, where there was one front door to a large network of resources accessible to veterans, and we helped navigate the service members, veterans, military family members to the resources they need when they needed them. The impact of that service would be enhanced significantly. And we started in New York City. Why we started there, I have no idea. But to build an America Serves network across the 5 boroughs of New York City, that was so successful that then we heard from Raleigh, then we heard from Charlotte, then San Antonio, then Seattle, and then Pittsburgh, and next thing you know, we're working with communities to build these networks all over the United States, and it's probably, I would describe it as one of the more innovative programs that we run. Next slide. Entrepreneurship. I'll only spend a minute here, only to say that this is our oldest portfolio of programs. We run these programs together, but also with partners. As I mentioned, our Entrepreneurship Bootcamp program, we have a network of university partners that also offer those programs all over the United States. The programming that we do really ranges from, single one-day training programs to, in the case of EBV, a very high-touch 30 service members, veterans at a time, travel for 8 days to a different university, go from 7 in the morning till 10 at night, and then work with mentors for the next year to get a business off the ground. So really a wide range with regard to, an introduction to business ownership all the way to a really deep dive in launching and growing a business. Next slide. This is the nerdy stuff. The team, the research team, I don't think likes it when I describe what they do as the nerdy stuff, but we have a very robust portfolio of research data analysis. We collect data on all of the programs that we run. Every individual that goes through one of our programs, we collect data before they start. We collect data every 6 months after they finish in the first year, and then every year after that first year, to really understand the impact that our program had, but more than that, to understand the issues and challenges that folks face over a period of time, as they make that transition to civilian life. And that data is informative to us on a whole host of fronts, but probably from a practical perspective, it's informative because we understand what we need to do ourselves to innovate and change and introduce new programs, et cetera, as a function of the challenges that folks then report back to us when we collect that data that evolve. So, for example, take business ownership. Some of our newer programs that we've created in the business ownership space, we've created because folks that the challenges, for example, that a veteran business owner faces getting a business off the ground initially the challenges 3 years later are very different when they've launched a business, they have employees, they have revenue, so we realize we need to, from that data, introduce new programs, introduce new interventions, if you will, to continue to serve the community with impact. Go to the next slide. The other thing that our research team is able to help us do, and this is a very contemporary and real example for you, is to continually pulse the community to understand what their challenges are right now today. And what you see on this next slide, this is a good example of that. We partnered with Military Times, and we've partnered with Military Times in the past as well. But when the COVID health crisis kicked off, we leveraged the Military Times platform to reach out to the active duty population, the veteran population, military family members, with a series of questions multiple times, asking them, what are you struggling with now? What are the biggest issues, challenges? And from 10 pages of report, I just grabbed a couple top line highlights as examples to share with you. But from that outreach, more than 4,000 folks, service members and veterans, responded to the questions that we posed. Medical care, community support, top issue that came back as a consequence of families, of service member families, veteran families, addressing the challenges now resulting from COVID-19. From veterans, it was all about claims and benefits. From active duty, it was really about family. If you notice those issues, it's about their kids. It's about supporting the unique needs of children. It's about maintaining and sustaining education. Female veterans and active duty service members, twice as likely as the rest of the community to report behavioral and mental health challenges as being top needs. So in the context of all of the military connected community, veterans generally, et cetera, those two sectors of our community, female veterans and active duty service members, twice as likely as others in our community to report mental health and behavioral health challenges stemming directly from COVID. And then our youngest veterans, this is a population that my history working in this space has always been that if you take a societal level challenge that is experienced by all, what you will find among the youngest veteran population is that societal level challenges is usually amplified 2 to 3 times. This was the case, for example, in 2009, 2010, during the last economic recession, when unemployment for the youngest Americans, for example, was 10, 11%. That same age group population represented among veterans, the 20 to 25-year-old youngest cohort of veterans, the unemployment rate for that group was somewhere upwards of 20 to 25%. And my concern and my fear coming out of COVID is that we're going to revisit that, particularly as it relates to unemployment for some period of time, as being amplified in this particular community. One more thing, and then I'll shut up, that I want to share with you. If you go to the next slide as well. So right now, I am the only human being that is likely sitting in this in the Dan and Gayle Daniello National Veterans Resource Center at Syracuse University. That is because this brand new $65 million building that was just completed on the Syracuse University campus, whose only purpose and function is to serve as a national center of excellence around the issues impacting veterans and their families. It is the home to our institute, is the home to all of the university's military and veteran connected programs. The grand opening of this building was scheduled on April 17th, 2020, and was canceled because of the COVID crisis. So we have yet to formally open this building to the world, but I do want to wrap up my time just giving you a little sense of what this building is. Go to the next slide. I hope this is my last one. This building, as I said, was created 100% with donor money, Syracuse University alumni and particularly Mr. Daniello, who was the founder of the Carlisle Group, but also a Navy veteran, made a large gift to help us build this building. This is the only building of its kind in all of higher education. And as I said, we really created this building as a national center of excellence to engage higher education as a community around the issues impacting vets and their families. 115,000 square foot building. It's the most accessible building that we've ever built at Syracuse University. There are no stairs in this building. It is entirely accessible by ramp. We held an international architectural design competition for the commission to design this building. To give you a sense, of the architect we select is a firm called Shop out of New York City. They designed the Barclays Center. They designed Google's offices. To give you a sense of the caliber of the architects, at the time the commission was out to design this building, the commission was also out to the competition for who was going to design the Obama Presidential Library and Center in Chicago. And the 3 finalists to design this building were 3 of the 5 finalists to design the Obama Library. We will open this building sometime to the world sometime soon, but we're very excited about the potential of this facility to enhance and amplify the work that we can do at the Institute all over the United States, but also to, again, create a bridge to higher education, and not just the, degree programs, but to engage the intellectual capital that resides in higher education, to start looking at and taking seriously and addressing issues and challenges impacting vets and their families. So we'll make sure you all get an invitation to the opening of the building whenever it happens. We're very disappointed we had to cancel it. The big substantive piece was Colin Powell was going to come up and do a fireside chat to open the building with an SU alum that some of you may have heard of, a guy named Mike Tirico, a very a famous sportscaster. They were going to have a discussion about the role of civil society and higher education and corporate America in engaging service members, veterans, and their families in this era of an all volunteer military. So we're still going to try to pull that off, but probably not till sometime in the fall. So maybe with that, I'll stop yammering on, and I'm happy to, if there are any questions folks want to ask me, or reactions, I'm happy to take them.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. Christina, you're facilitating, right?
I am. Yes, I am. Thank you, Dr. Haynie. Thank you, JD. So I'm just going to jump over to some of the questions that we have. So the first question, so Dr. Haynie, what have you and potentially your team created or attended to help bridge the military-civilian divide that has established the well-fostered veteran/military-friendly community you have?
So that is a great question, and I wish I had the silver bullet answer to that question. I have to be honest with you. I don't think I can point to one specific thing. It's been a lot of work. Often one relationship, one conversation at a time. One of the things that happened almost by accident for me related to this is a few years back, I made a commitment. Sometimes you will learn I'm somebody that says no or says yes before I think about it, and which gets me into a position where I'll sometimes commit to things that I come to regret later on. This will not be one of them, by the way. But back in 2014, I committed to do a TED Talk out at the University of Nevada, but I didn't commit to myself to actually prepare it. So on very short notice, I had to think about what I was going to say, and I happened to be coming back from an American Legion national conference as I'm trying, and I had an experience with a young veteran on an airplane that became the basis for this TED Talk that I gave in 2014. And you can find it on the internet if you'd like to watch it. But in that talk, I compare the experience that I had on that airplane talking to a woman who happened to be sitting next to me, who started talking about all the things she does for service members when she sees them in airports and things like that. And I probably was in a little bad mood at the time. It was late, and so I pushed back a little bit and asked her some harder questions about the community that we all represent, and she got a little frustrated with me. And unbeknownst to me, on the other side of the aisle was a kid that was listening to this whole conversation, and turns out he was a young Marine who had just gotten out of the military and was struggling in a lot of different ways. And for me, that TED Talk has become a way for me to introduce people to the topic of the military and civilian divide. That story of this kid Tim that overheard a conversation where this woman that was sitting next to me, really demonstrated profound ignorance of what it means to serve in the military, what it means to transition from the military, and some of the challenges. What she did understand is what she sees on TV. What she did understand is what happens, at a football game at halftime. But her base of knowledge was no deeper than that. And, but I think what I take away, and this is a long way to answer your question, what I take away from that is I needed a way to tell that story that was human. I needed a way to tell that story that was real and that was emotional, that people could connect to. Where I have not found success are all of the academic arguments, the policy arguments. I mean, there's a strong case to be made that in the era of an all-volunteer military, there is a societal level obligation for our institutions, states, colleges, universities, et cetera, to engage with the military and veteran connected community in very specific ways. I can make those academic arguments, however, those policy arguments all day and get nowhere. But when I tell the story of an actual veteran, when I tell the story of Tim, that guy who was sitting next to me on the airplane, it creates a connection that moves the conversation forward a little bit. So I guess my answer to the question is there is no silver bullet. It's a lot of hard work winning hearts and minds, sometimes one at a time.
Thank you. JD, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, we've obviously, as an organization, talked a lot about the military-civilian divide.
Yeah.
And that we
Well, I agree with Mike. I think, obviously they've got a whole, what does he say? They've got a whole bunch of data nerds who are working on stuff that so they understand the needs of people, but throwing slides up, with charts and graphs and stuff doesn't connect with people. And we see this in our interaction, with service members and with our donors and with the public, right? You really need to build the story, but it needs to be informed by that data, right? In other words, all too often, some of the emotional things you say about the military are just dead wrong. They're just not right. And they're coming out of Hollywood, or they're coming out of whatever, some bad news story. So I think figuring out ways that we can connect with a really strong emotional narrative, but to something that actually rings true and rings true with our veterans is a really important part of this. So that's exactly right.
I agree.
Great, thank you both. So next question. Dr. Haynie, do you have data collected that holds the best higher education certificates, degrees that provide career opportunities for active duty spouses?
We do. And as a follow-up to this conversation, I'll make sure that we circle back to you with that data. And it's not, and what this is one of the things we actually do every year. We work with some of our partners, not just to look at higher education, traditional higher ed in terms of degree certifications, but we also do surveys of the civilian labor market to understand where companies are hiring and what degrees, credentials, certifications are in demand, if you will. The PMP is a great example, the Program Management Professional. That's our most popular certification in our Onward to Opportunity program. If you look at data, the difference between having that certification and not having that certification in the same job in the civilian labor market is about $15,000 in salary. That one certification in otherwise the same job where program management skills are important will bring you an additional $15,000 in salary. That's the kind of data that we collect every year so that we can focus our vocational programs, our skills training programs around not just providing a skill or a pathway to a vocation, but to identify the vocations, the skills that are best positioned to set a veteran, a service member up for long-term success. So I'll circle back with that data and provide it freely. Absolutely. Anything that we can do.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next question. So you mentioned that your organization published a report around COVID-19. Can you share any deeper dives on active duty data? And is there some place where our colleagues might be able to find this report?
Yes. So I'm going to answer the latter. I'm looking up at my computer because I had the PDF up here before we started. How about I do this? Along with sharing that data right after this call, we will send you that full report that you can distribute to the entire organization. And importantly, we're going to continue collecting that data. We're going to go out with additional polls to the community. So I will make sure that that your leadership ends up on the distribution list of all of the findings from those polls.
Great, thank you. So when you and your team look at the MSO and VSO landscape, where do you see new or unmet service or support opportunities? Is there places where some of these organizations are not meeting some of the demands of our servicemen and women?
so you give me that's a very loaded question for me, and people, if there are folks from my team on this call, they're all saying uh-oh when you ask that question, because it's not, from my perspective, I've been now in this space for going on 14 years, and sometimes I think the veteran serving community can be its own worst enemy. We have a tendency, I think, in this space to want to be everything to everybody all the time, and I'll suggest that maybe the real question is, there are unmet needs, no doubt. There's also a ton of redundancy in the context of what we do as a community. There's a lot of overbuilt infrastructure, if you will. Veteran serving organizations tend to follow this path of beginning at their founding, doing one very focused thing very well that serves a legitimate need. And then they drift and creep to adding this service and that service and doing this thing and serving this other community. And, the unfortunate consequences of that is often they end up at a place where they don't do anything all that well. One of the things that I have really emphasized with my team is that we are only going to introduce new programs, new services to meet a need if in fact there isn't somebody else already out there doing it better than we could do it. So and the same is also true. One of the questions that I got that I loved as an entrepreneurship professor from somebody before we started this was, how do you stay entrepreneurial? How do you stay innovative? This is what I study for a living. I love this stuff. And it really does relate to this question about unmet needs. And the idea of being able to walk away from something, even if you've done it for a long time, a program that could have been at one point core to what you do, if the needs of the community have changed such that you're not uniquely addressing a need that others are not addressing with a given program, that's another way of saying that you're not taking the scarce resources that you have, and we all know that we all are scratching every day for donors and dollars. You have an obligation as an organization. I have an obligation, as running the IVMF. JD, I'm sure, knows this well, to put every dollar to its first best use, serving a service member or a veteran or a family member. And if you can't wake up every day and say you're doing that, then to me, that is the impetus for something new, something different, something innovative. So, I think that this idea of staying connected to the community, understanding how their needs are changing. Not to go on a tangent, but I remember an instance. I was out at JBLM a few years ago with, I was with a good friend of mine that some of JD, I know, knows him, Colonel Miguel Howe. He was running the Bush Institute program for many years. And we were standing outside of the rec center at an employment event, and there was a big line of soldiers. And he said, "Mike, look at that! Look at all those soldiers waiting to get into this thing. Tell me what you see. What's unique about them?" And I was an Air Force guy. I didn't understand patches, Army patches and all that. But the point he was trying to make, he said, "Look, not a single one of them. They're all getting out of the military. Not a single one of them has a combat deployment patch on their uniform. None of them have ever deployed." And they went through an entire enlistment. They didn't deploy. That is one example of the kind of light bulbs that I look for. That means maybe we should be doing something different for this population. That means that the needs of this population are probably very different than the population that we served last year. So, creating ways for that kind of insight, that kind of data to come to your organization, and then be willing to both try new things, and walk away from things that is still with your enemy. Walk away from things that you may have done for a long time if they're not meeting the first best need that's represented by the community that you're serving. Again, that's probably a lot more than you wanted, but that's the kind that gets me excited.
Great.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, there are 48,000 so-called military and veteran service organizations. There's another 400,000 organizations that do something for the military. And so it really is a landscape that is, needs,
You can say
there's
it.
a lot of redundant capability, right? And one of the things at the USO, Mike, that we've struggled with is a lot of people over the years have tried to push us into the veteran service area.
Yeah.
And to say, why aren't you doing more with veterans? And of course, and we took a very hard look at that a few years ago. We were scattering money all over the place. But what we ended up doing is saying, look, our best niche is really with that active duty force that's just about to get out. If we're going to do anything in this transition space, it's really focused on the people who still have the uniform on and who are just about to get out, right? So to kind of help on the upstream problem. And we felt we had infrastructure to do that and positioning and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people were tempting us into the rest of it,
Yeah.
And I said, there's some great organizations out there, among them yours, doing this kind of work. Why would we want to repeat all of that, And so, but it's a classic example of mission creep and chasing the dollars.
Yes, exactly. I think that, and that the latter is a big part of, I think I've come to understand why this happens in the veteran space is especially for a period of time, in the 2000, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's really where you saw the rise of all these veterans organizations. And it happened because it was too easy to get money. It was too easy to hang out a shingle, say you're going to do something for veterans and to find dollars. And now, however, the consequence of that is, we hear from service members and veterans every year when we ask them what their top challenges are when they make the transition from military to civilian life. It's actually navigation. It's actually figuring out how to navigate this landscape that you described of 48,000 organizations all out there wanting to help them, and they don't know where to start, who to go to first, even if they're eligible.
Yep. The other one I get is if I had $1, this is an exaggeration, but $1 for every person who said, I want to start a veterans service organization, right? And I wouldn't have to fundraise if I had $1. So, and I say to them, please don't do that. Find one that you like and help them. Yeah. Don't start a new one,
I agree.
Make an existing one better, Anyway.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're at time. We're actually a little over time. So JD and Dr. Haynie, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been great to have you here, and we look forward to future discussions. Is there anything you want to say, JD, before we end?
I just want to thank Dr. Haynie for not only his spending some time with us today, it was very informative, but also for all the fantastic work that he, through the University of Syracuse University, do for our service members and veterans. So thank you, and thank your whole team for everything they do.
Well, and right back to you. Thank you. I'm humbled to just have the opportunity to talk to you all for a little while, and I do hope into the future that we can continue to work together and partner together and find ways to do innovative things in this space.
You can count on it.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon. Bye.